Reverb basics. So we've come to the point in our mix where we're ready to add some reverb. Now we did set up our auxiliaries to do our reverb earlier, and in the process of doing our dynamics and our equalization, we hid our auxiliary sends so we could see everything a little better. And so we're going to bring those back right now. So if we go down here into our mix window view and we see the sends A through E and sends F through J, now we can see that we have on send A, verb 1 is set up on every single track except for our submixes. That send A, that verb 1, is going right here to the input verb 1 right here on auxiliary verb 1. And on send F, we have verb 2, which is going to the input verb 2 on our auxiliary called the verb 2. Now if you want to see more how that's set up and remind yourself how that's set up, you can go back to preparing to mix on auxiliaries. Okay, so now we basically just need to add reverb on these two auxiliaries and we can start working with our reverb. So right now we're going to do a little bit of a review of the different types of reverb and how reverb functions. And a lot of this is covered in audio recording and production. And so if you have access to that, that'd be a good idea to go and review. But we're going to run through a little bit of that real quick here. So if we go to reverb, and we go to TL space, this is a great one. It's got some nice images and such, and we can see kind of the history of reverb with these images right here. So the most basic kind of reverb is an actual space. And so like I was saying before, there's the direct sound coming directly from a person to you and reflected sound bouncing around in the room. The larger the room, the more reflected sound there is, the longer the reflected sound will hang around and it will take longer to decay. And so it sounds bigger and longer and it sounds like a larger room. And so our brain tells us, based on those decay times, if we're in a small room or a large room. That's why you can tell that when you close your eyes. Okay, and so the first type of reverb is actually just recording the ambience or reverb of a room. And the way to do that while you're recording is you can move the mic further away from the subject, or you can have two mics, one that's in your regular miking position and then a room mic or an ambience mic to pick up that reverb that's occurring in the room. Now this is a great way to do it, but it's not always the circumstance where you're going to be able to record in a really nice sounding room. And most recording studios are set up to have usually pretty dead sounding rooms where there's not a lot of reflections so that the ambience can be added later in the mixing process, which is where we are right now. And so there's a handful of ways that have developed over the history of recording of how you can create reverb in a mixing session. Now, one of the first ways was a chamber. And the way a chamber works is the sound is put into the room with speakers and it reflects around in the room, and then those reflections are picked up by microphones. And so you can take and use this empty room and recreate reverb in that room with vocals that are already recorded in your session or off of a tape machine or something like that. Okay, and that was used a lot of the 40s and 50s and 60s recordings. A lot of that lush vocal sound is from a lot of these chambers and such. Okay, then we have plates. And what a plate is it's basically, it's hard to tell with these pictures here, but it basically is a big sheet of metal that has two magnets on it. One's like a speaker and one is like a microphone. And the speaker magnet vibrates the plate and it kind of shakes around and warbles around. And the microphone magnet picks up those vibrations and it sounds kind of like reverb. And plates are very popularly used for vocals and such, and they sound really good. Okay, then we have a spring reverb, which is very similar to a plate. Okay, and the difference is instead of a big sheet of metal, we have springs, and these are commonly found in guitars and other places as well. Okay, and then we have digital reverbs. So because reverb is basically just a bunch of delays, and when the sound is delayed, it loses energy, so it becomes softer. That information can be programmed into a digital reverb, kind of a computer program of such, that it recreates all those delays and the different volumes and such. And so you have all these wonderful digital reverbs that were created to recreate all these large spaces and such, and then you didn't have to have a chamber reverb, and you didn't have to have a big plate, and a lot of times you can just have a simple rack mount unit here, and now you have reverb. Okay, and then finally what we have is what TL Space is, which is a convolution reverb. And a convolution reverb is really the most popular kind of reverb nowadays. And what a convolution reverb basically does is it takes and recreates the sound of a space by actually going and recording and capturing that space. And so what it's called is an IR, impulse response, where you actually put a speaker and a microphone in a room, you send some pulses through the speaker, you pick up with the microphone the reflections that occur because of that, and then with that information you can take and apply it to the information, the sounds, the waveforms in your mix. And so now you can take and put your mix, your vocal, into a large space. Or a second later, you can take and put it into a factory. And so we're going to use some convolution reverbs as well as some digital reverbs. And in the next video, we're going to go over the process of deciding how many reverbs you're going to use and what's going to work best in your session as you're trying to add reverb.